We've just been talking about football, and I know people are itching to talk about politics, but these are the issues that people should be discussing: environmental degradation, climate change, surely. In other jurisdictions, when it comes to political campaigns, the environment and climate change are some of the big discussions. In Kenya, Ishmael, let's start with you. In Kenya, we rarely talk about the environment. Are we getting it wrong? Does it mean that in as far as Kenyans are concerned, the issue of climate change is yet to hit us?
Yeah, I think first of all, we are not aware of really the impact of climate change. Sorry, I have to tell you this, that my son came to me late in the night and he was crying that probably the world is going to collapse because of global warming. I didn't know what to tell him because, I mean, I think these are things they pick through cartoon and whatever they learn here and there with their fellow kids. So I think as a country, we are not addressing the issue of global warming, climate change, they call them green gas emissions, all these things. I know that experts can help us better to analyze this whole issue, but in terms of what Kenya is doing, it comes out that we are really not prepared. We do not probably know why temperatures are rising every time. And this is why you see the United Nations, the World Bank have come together to try to support countries, and that is the real issue about COP26. There are certain parameters that have been set by the world leaders, leading economies, to ensure that the country's temperatures, the global temperatures generally, can be maintained. And we can do this if, as they say, emissions are within reach and within control. But this is not happening because when you look at what happens all over in the villages, we have to use firewood. There's a lot of smoke. When you look at the kind of vehicles that we bring to the country, there are those ones which have been used outside Kenya. There will be a lot of gas emissions. So I think that the coming together of leading nations under the United Nations umbrella to try to control temperatures from, getting to, higher levels is important. But what I also must say is, growing economies should be prepared so that the advanced economies do not take advantage of the growing ones, because all these emissions actually happen more in the first world countries than they happen here in Africa. Why? Because of industrialization, manufacturing, all these things are all over there in the West. So I think Kenya should be prepared to understand that much as the world wants to help the country to control temperatures, we must take advantage of our selfish interests first, so that we are not just merely being told that you cannot put up more industries and manufacturing plants, in favor of the benefits of the West.
Yes, and of course it's a fact that Kenyans are least concerned about this conversation, that even our politicians are not mentioning anything, even with regard to conservation of the environment is regarded more as an administrative matter than something to do with societal participation. Hesbon Nowela, this is a kind of conversation we should be getting from our politicians, don't you think? The fact that we are not even talking about it. The president himself represented Kenya at the COP26, but back home, no one was even bothered.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Fred. This is a conversation that we need to have robustly in the public domain. But there is an accent to which I disagree with you. This is not a politician's conversation. I think the only institution that the public has some sort of a social contract with that is binding is the media. And if the president went to Glasgow and they discussed climate change issues and the public seems less bothered, I think there's a sense in which we just need to come back and ask ourselves, what are the critical agenda items that the media is setting? Today, the world is discussing taking back the increase in global temperature to below 1.5 degrees centigrade, above the pre-industrial, increase in temperatures. And the critical conversation there is around adaptation and mitigation. And the powerful countries in the world are actually committing, though their commitment is always questioned because they committed to 100 billion USD in Paris in 2015, and by 2020, we are in 2021, and this developing countries that are supposed to gain from that in terms of adaptation are yet even to receive half of that. Then in Glasgow, they've promised 200 billion as financing by 2025 for developing countries like Kenya to use for mitigation. And the cost of mitigation as we speak today from the conference is said to be 70 billion a year. So there's a sense in which countries like Kenya are actually receiving money, of course, with less commitment from these developed countries that are increasing the global temperatures because of their industrial capacity. But then there isn't enough understanding of how that money is coming in to mitigate this impact of global warming. Mm-hmm. So if you ask me from a very, communication point of view, it is not really a question of politicians setting that agenda. I think we live in a world where everything is a lot more mediatized than it was a few years ago.
Okay.
And therefore that media logic, that scenario where the media is setting issues that the political class responds to is what we are lacking. Okay. The media can actually force the attention of politicians to global warming issues and what is coming in from these countries that are responsible for the high temperatures in the world today and what they are doing in terms of remitting money for adaptation and what the government is doing with that money. I think that conversation squarely lies with the media. Okay. No politician is interested in articulating complicated things like
yet it's the politicians who will be in charge of implementing.
But the world that we live...
It is the politicians, it's the ones who are campaigning to become president or go to parliament who will have the task of actually implementing or legislating in as far as issues or interventions that Kenyans can take part in as far as global warming is concerned. It is still very curious, Kipchumba, that Kenya had one of the biggest delegations, and this is one of the stories that people are talking about, that the Kenyan delegation to the COP26 was perhaps one of the biggest, I think the 6th biggest. The US and the UK combined had smaller delegations. The president himself led this delegation from Kenya. The deputy president's wife, Rachel Ruto, was also there because she's been involved in one of the environmental campaigns as well. Definitely, it is something that the leaders are concerned about, but the electorate is totally oblivious about this conversation. Why is that? For a nation that hosts the United Nations Environmental Program headquarters, Kipchumba.
First of all, Fred, you ask yourself, does somebody who live in Malava know that we have a UNEP headquarters here? That is where we need to begin from. Mm-hmm. It is of significance or of importance to those people, the Nairobi dwellers. But if you live outside Nairobi, it is just something that is taught in, back then it was GHC, I don't know what's the name of the course with CBC. But back to the germane conversation. The conversation here, we can't, for example, Fred, think that environment will take center stage in this country. That is utopian. That is ivory tower thinking. For the simple reason that in this country, people want to listen to what are the, in terms of priority. One, this is a country where people, 14 million, are facing starvation. There are all manner of things. We still have IDPs not settled. Climate change can be one of the things on the table. But back to the main problem.
But drought, which causes...
Yes, actually, the problem now
the consequence is starvation is as a result of climate change. Let
me drive the ball to the goal.
Yes.
The problem is we have allowed politicians and not the media to set agenda. And I agree with Dr. Bondowila. If we were to make climate change an agenda and force it, we will force politicians to discuss. Just the same way we have forced them to discuss the economy, because we are in recession. Although it is a gray area recession, we are in one. But coming back to things like, even look at how unserious we are with serious issues. Look at the delegation we took to the COP at Glasgow. We took their people to do shopping and to earn per diems. Going to discuss climate change was not even in the... There are very few people in that delegation. If you are to have a live interview with them here, to tell them, tell us the gains from Glasgow, tell us the salient features, they can't, because they were there to do other co-curricular things away from the main event. But coming back to to the Glasgow meeting. There is a problem I have with developed nations. If Fred today, and God forbid, it was developing nations having an issue with the environment, or the climate change was caused by developing nations, it will have been declared as war. But it is because it is the strong who are causing the problem. The weak have no recourse. Look at even the commitments people do, nations, individual nations were undertaking. There were no obligations given to individual nations. All we had were commitments. Those commitments count for nothing if they are not backed by obligatory terms, so that we know, for example, China has this obligation, United States has this obligation, and then again, we need to reduce obligation into the percentage of harm caused by these nations. Look at, for example, now, the nations causing oceanic degradation. The climate change there, in terms of the habitat of the ocean animals and other things, we are seeing serious problems happening. What is happening in Alaska and other places where they are doing mining in the ice area? Nobody is talking about those things. At the end of the day, if we allow companies and the big oil companies to run away, what we call the Seven Sisters, to run away without having a direct obligation in terms of climate change, we will achieve very little. At the end of the day, even look at the cost of ameliorating the problem at 72 billion annually, and the cost keep on rising. Do we have commitment? A country like this, which cannot provide salaries on time for its staff, cannot start talking about climate change, for example, because we have more problems pressing at home. Back again to the people who matter the discussion. I think we need to allow subject matter experts to lead the discussion. Politicians will do that which the populace see here now, because our voters, third world country voters, are pictorial animals. They cannot perceive things that are away. Look at what has happened to places like Mombasa. There have not been serious rains this year. That is an effect of climate change. But when politicians come out, what do they say? Yes. They say rain comes from somewhere, not from trees. And
it's not understanding this Mukwa that probably is a problem, because we are suffering as a country. The kind of droughts, extended drought we're suffering, we are experiencing disarranged rainfall patterns. All this is a direct result of climate change. Yet we appear to be willing to sit back and say, this is a discussion that is beyond our level. Let's leave it to other countries. We will not discuss it here. Let's talk about handouts or something else. Do you think it is safe to do that as Kenyans?
No. And allow me to approach the question from 3 levels. First of all, we start with Kenya. And in my view, environmental issues are so serious in Kenya that there was a cabinet issue. You recall the catfight between William Samoei Ruto and Raila Odinga around Mau. That is an environmental issue which cost Raila Odinga a lot of votes in Rift Valley, because he took a position, a very firm position, and we were told then that it was a cabinet decision and it had to be done. So environmental issues, in my view, are huge, are serious, and the politicians have to be at the forefront, because at the end of the day, you'll have the subject matter experts. At the end of the day, you'll have a lot of conversations, but it's the politicians who will take political decisions on how to make progress. So in my view, in as much as we expect the media to take a leadership role, it's important for the politicians, because, you know, the buck stops with them. They're the ones who will come up with the pieces of legislation, they're coming up with policies, and they're the ones who are going to be offering as a direction. So the media is very critical in highlighting, but it's these same politicians. For instance, the deputy president has got a PhD around these environmental issues. One would have expected that when he's talking about the bottom-up economic model, he can integrate this global warming, climate change, and tell Mora how we can take advantage of these carbon credits, how we can make progress, whether or not we are going to support countries that are engaged in coal. So in my view, this responsibility is right with Mora and right with the politicians. That is number one. Number two, Kenya is notorious for sending so many people in a delegation, and we need to ask them to give us a report that when they went to COP26, what was the objective of the Kenyan delegation? and what have they achieved, so that we understand. If you have a delegation of about 250 people, what was President Kenyatta going to do? What was Mama Rachel Ruto going to do? All these people, I mean, what did they achieve? So that if the raison d'etre of travel was to do shopping or go to places and come back with, expensive clothes, then we understand their role, and then we can also seek to establish who paid the bills. Then at the international level, the US president has taken it seriously that he's got John Kerry, who occupies a cabinet level position, pushing this agenda. Maybe it's time we considered a similar position back at home, so that this issue is mainstreamed. But in my view, this COP26 meeting was a complete waste of time, because the people who are gathered there, all of them are in the same choir. They are reading from the same hymn book. They have accepted that global warming does exist. They know the problem and they know the solution. So all the time, in my view, they spent there was wasted, because the two key people, or rather two key nations that have taken a divergent position were not present. Russia was not around, and China was not around. So everything that was discussed at COP26 is a complete waste of time if there is no concurrence with Russia, if there is no concurrence with China. And in my view, the conversation at COP26 would have taken place with only three personalities: the president of the US, the president of China, and the president of Russia. Those are three politicians can actually give us direction on how to manage this situation. But you go and have deliberations and the two giant victims are missing in action, then really what are you doing? It's a waste of time.
Okay, it was a waste of time according to Dismas Mukua. And of course, questions that have been raised with regard to the commitment of the big nations who are said to be the ones really who are behind this carbon emissions, which are causing climate change. The conversation continues globally. Here in Kenya, we are least concerned, and that's just a fact. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll listen to your voice, you call us, and give us your opinion about the show.